content. So today's lecture is super fast, short and sweet, just talking about the Earth's 4 spheres. So today we're just going to summarize the distinguishing characteristics of Earth, including what we call its 4 spheres. But first, let's stop to think about what is environmental science. So the definition of environmental science is just the study of the effects of both natural and unnatural processes and interactions of the physical components of the planet on the environment. So basically, environmental science is this intersection between the natural sciences or the natural processes. So you can think about geology, you can think about biology, and those unnatural processes, so lots of human influence on the environment, and how those two things, the natural sciences and these unnatural processes, combine and interact to impact the environment. And so when we're thinking about Earth and sort of where it is in the universe and where it is in the solar system and what makes it so special, we can think about the Earth in comparison to other planets and other planetary bodies in our solar system. And so a really good example is comparing the Earth to our moon. And so usually if we were in class, we would stop and chat with a partner to think about the differences between the moon and the Earth. So go ahead, pause the video, just take a couple of seconds, 20 seconds to jot down some things that you notice, some differences between the moon and the Earth. Pause it now. Okay, so when you're looking at the moon versus the Earth, you might notice that the Earth is blue, right? So the Earth is blue because there's water on Earth's surface. That's part of something we call the hydrosphere. You might have noticed the white clouds on Earth, right, which we don't have on the moon. And so those white clouds are a part of the hydrosphere, but they're also a part of the atmosphere. You might have noticed some green on Earth's surface, right, which is a representation of vegetation, which is a part of the biosphere. And then you might have noticed some rocky bits, right? And that rocky hard surface is a part of what we call the geosphere. And so the Earth is unique because it has those 4 spheres that all interact with each other. And so this lecture, we will talk about each one of those spheres a little bit. All right, so here's sort of what I just said, summarized a little bit. So the Earth has what we call 4 spheres, and these are the outermost layers of Earth. So the atmosphere, right, is what we breathe, right? It's the air we breathe. It protects us from damaging radiation from the sun. It sort of acts like our little blanket around Earth to keep us safe from radiation from space and warm enough, right? So the atmosphere is the air that surrounds Earth. The hydrosphere is all of the water on Earth, right? So that could be our oceans, that could be the water that is held in clouds, it can be water that's held underground, right? It can be rivers, it can be lakes. So all of the water on Earth encompasses the hydrosphere. The biosphere is made up of all living things, right? So bacteria, all of those little tiny microscopic organisms, plants, animals, everything that's living is a part of the biosphere. And then the geosphere is the solid part of Earth, right? So when you think about geology, when you think about rocks, that encompasses the geosphere. And so you'll notice on the syllabus, if you haven't already, that we've kind of broken this course down into talking about each one of these different layers in turn. So we're going to start the course talking about the geosphere, then we'll talk about the hydrosphere, and then the atmosphere, and then the biosphere. But the cool thing about Earth's 4 spheres is that they all interact with one another. And those interaction processes are what we're interested in environmental science. Right? So here's some definitions, right? The atmosphere is the envelope of gas that surrounds Earth's surface. The cool thing about the atmosphere is it doesn't make up a very large portion of Earth's mass at all. It's less than 0.01% of the Earth's mass. But it's really super important for life, right? Because it provides the air that we need to survive. And so our modern atmosphere is made up of mostly nitrogen and oxygen, 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and then small amounts of other gases. But the earliest atmosphere of Earth was much different. It was made up mostly of carbon dioxide with essentially no oxygen, and it has changed over Earth's history. And so what we see when we look at other solid planets in our solar system is that if they do have an atmosphere, it's made up mostly of carbon dioxide, because the reason that we have so much nitrogen and oxygen in our Earth's atmosphere today is actually due to plant life. The hydrosphere, that second sphere, is just that mass of water on the surface of Earth. And so we call Earth the big blue planet because water covers about 71% of the surface. And so we have water in the ocean. That's about 97% of all water on Earth. About 3% of freshwater, 3% of water on Earth is fresh water. And if we break that 3% of fresh water down, most of it's held up in ice caps and glaciers. We can't easily get to it because it's frozen. A third of it's held up in the ground, so it's harder to get to because it's groundwater. And then the surface water makes up a very small percentage of the fresh water on Earth. And of that surface water, that's where we get the majority of our drinking water. And so the movement of water within the hydrosphere is called the water cycle. I know you guys are familiar with the water cycle because we learn it as small children in elementary school. So we will talk about lots of different parts of the water cycle. This semester, we will have lectures about the ocean. We will have lectures about the atmosphere, how clouds form, and precipitation. We'll talk about volcanoes. We'll talk about ice, snow. We'll talk about streams and lakes. We will talk about groundwater and plant uptake and flora and fauna. So a lot of these things in the water cycle we will talk about as we move through the semester. But just a refresher on the water cycle, remember that water evaporates, right? It goes from a liquid into a gas, and then it condenses back into a liquid, precipitates down as liquid, right? And then eventually flows back into the ocean and cycles through the water cycle. All right, that third sphere is the biosphere, which is just all of the living organic matter on Earth, right? So all of Earth's living things or things that were once alive comprise the biosphere. And even though the biosphere is a really small portion of Earth, it's a really major geologic force. It's really important to environmental science. So as I mentioned, life on Earth has effectively changed our atmospheric composition from what it was at the beginning of Earth's history. And when we're thinking about the fossil record, we're thinking about conservation, we're thinking about humans interacting with the environment. The biosphere, even though it's small, it is this major force in geology. It's this major force in environmental science. And then finally, the geosphere is the solid portion of Earth, right? So the geosphere is the rocky, hard part of Earth. And Earth is something called a differentiated planet, which means that it's separated into different layers. And Earth can be separated into different layers based on chemical composition or physical properties. And we will get into those layers later in the semester.